Is globalization in the middle market corporate world a good thing or a bad thing? Well, we can at least talk about some of the variables in this video. When we think of globalization, we think of textile trades being outsourced to Indonesia and China in the 1990s. We think of heavy industry and steel and manufacturing being outsourced in the 1980s and the 1970s. But we're seeing a globalization right now, particularly within services companies, and particularly kind of coming down the food chain into the middle market and the lower middle market. And the question that we oftentimes receive from clients and from participants in the ecosystem that we're talking with are, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Well, I think it's first important, and what we wanted to highlight in this video is what are some of the variables that are indicative that there is this globalization taking place? What are some of the things we're seeing, some of the sea changes? It's a conversation we're often having, so we wanted to dig into it. We're going to talk about 5 observations that we've made, one takeaway. Although I don't think there's a dispositive answer to be made as to whether something is good or bad. It is, right? It's taking place, and I think the best thing that we can all do as business people, and we try to do even in our own business, is take into account what sea changes are taking place, what things that exist are likely to still exist, what changes are going to inevitably take place whether we like it or not. How do we best adapt to that? So the first is technology. I'm old enough, and you can't see all of the gray hairs in the videos, to remember the days where the long-distance phone call was a real pain and very expensive. And so businesses, by virtue of that, were hyper-regional, purely from the basis of communication. Now, as things evolved and cell phones came out and phone calls could be made nationally, internationally, that certainly helped with communication. But the real accelerant of this was, particularly during COVID, Zoom. Communications could be done face-to-face. Everyone can chat as if they're in the same room. Now, look, there's certainly some lost elements and body cues and productivity relative to people being in the same room, but there are components of every business that do not necessitate being in the same room, and therefore that technology has created a global landscape for communication within a business. Second is pay disparity, and this goes with communication. Certain countries, particularly in the Western world, have had pay escalations for particularly white-collar jobs over time that have far exceeded those of obviously some countries that are poor, that are obvious, but even from countries that are developing, that have, let's call it Western caliber educations, yet where the cost of living is nowhere near that of the US, the UK, other countries in Western Europe, etc. And so this goes to number 3, is international options. When someone is looking to hire for a business, particularly again within services companies, particularly again where an on-site element is not component of it, there's international options. And so we've talked to private equity firms who the intake people who are doing the initial screening of deals, even though this private equity firm is nearby us and they're in New York, these screening people are in Dublin, Ireland, they're in Spain, they're in Romania, Bulgaria, other places like that. And the interesting thing is that there's this misconception, particularly, I can at least speak for here in America, that the options are either, US, UK, or India, right? And then there's this perceived value gap or quality gap within that, which isn't necessarily true to begin with. But in reality, it's a lot more gradient than that. And there are countries all over the world where there's incredibly intelligent people that are capable, and where the price disparity makes the value decision one that warrants a look. And look, it's just starting to creep into more of the middle market services companies. But if you look online, if you were to go to LinkedIn and type in any of the big 4 accounting firms, any of the large investment banks, and type in a country in Eastern Europe, type in Colombia, Argentina, you're going to see that they have teams in all these places, not just working on regional activities, but on multinational activities where the work can be allocated at a better price point. And so this further evolves into the next point of a decentralized workforce. And so in many companies, again, there may be an executive team, an executive suite that has a regional proximity due to the fact that they started the company or that they've really developed the company, but that the workforce is otherwise really spread out. We've seen this with large companies, and you saw everybody working remote. Now there's a big push to return to office, but in the likely outcome of all of this is there's going to be some kind of a hybrid situation. Not necessarily that every person is going to have a hybrid role, but that the company is going to be built in a hybrid complexity, right? Let's take, for example, if you had an insurance company and you needed an insurance salesman, well, you need those people on the ground, and you have the insurance executives, well, those people have to be in the office. But what about the underwriting? What about the parts that are just purely looking at the probabilities and writing reports, right? That's a much more metric-driven situation. And yes, perhaps those people being aware and familiar with the other people that they're partaking business with within the company is important. However, largely the duties of what they're doing do not need to be centralized in one location. And therefore, therefore, I expect, take it with a grain of salt, that you'll see companies that have certain activities that need to be on site, certain activities that need to be regional, and the other things more decentralized because they don't need to be in office space, and the productivity, if you will, or the output for those participants within the business can be gauged and calculated and monitored remotely, right? As long as the person gets X amount of these things done every day, then it doesn't really matter where they are. Again, up for discussion, but that's more and more of what we're seeing. And in turn, and lastly, you're going to see less physical infrastructure. And so there was a time where mahogany bookshelves and libraries and parlors were all important parts of the business. And there are elements of that, right? Elements of client interactions that are still very important and will never go away because it's an important part of business. The human interaction can never go away as long as humans are involved. And we won't digress into any AI philosophies here, right? But that being said, the big, beautiful office in every location where business operates may not be as necessary. And so you're going to see less and less of the physical infrastructure. So what does this all mean? So we've talked about, we'll just list them off right here, right? The increase of technology, pay disparities globally, international options, particularly amongst white-collar work, the decentralization of the workforce, and the lack of physical infrastructure or the lack of a need for as much physical infrastructure. And so look, we still like people in the office. However, business operations will continue to be disaggregated in a way that allows for the optimization on a global basis. And so what does that mean? If a business does a process and it can be broken down into 4 chunks, you better believe that ownership and the executives of that business are going to say which chunks of the business must stay onshore, which chunks of the business can be offshored. And again, it can be onshore, offshore in the sense of still domestic US for US companies or still Western Europe, or it can be kind of secondary countries and then kind of further down. So you're going to see this whole spread of business activities on a global basis where companies are really gauging just how important certain activities are, to what extent certain things can be shifted. So what does this all mean for the economy? Well, good and bad to some extent, right? I mean, obviously, if work can be shifted all over the world, then for those in the countries that benefited from the work being there, again, Western Europe and the US, you're going to see some of those jobs go overseas, very much in the same way that manufacturing did, very much in the same way that you saw fashion, textiles and things like that, pharmaceutical manufacturing. There will be a globalization of white-collar jobs, and we're already seeing that. And as much as AI has been the focus over the last few years, what may not be as sensationalized, but is considerably, we believe, more disruptive in many ways. We don't like to use the word disruptive as if it's a negative, but just that there are changes, is going to be the globalization of the white-collar workforce. So we're already seeing it. It's starting to creep into the middle market. And again, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. This is something that we're seeing. I only see an acceleration of this taking place, and it's something to be characterized as we're selling businesses, as we're talking about opportunities for business growth from capital perspective, and it's something that at least needs to be on the radar of everybody as their businesses grow, as their businesses evolve, and as their businesses continue to succeed. So that's a thought for today. Is globalization good or bad? Sorry we don't have a more sensationalized answer. It's a bit of a don't know, but we have to deal with it one way or the other. So whether we want to attribute a positive or negative feeling to it, something that needs to be tackled and evaluated in business decisions going forward. So that's a thought for today. Hope the week continues to go well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. See you next time.